Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Today we're talking about ergonomics. That's the kind of the topic of what we're saying here and discussing today. And if you notice that a lot of businesses, some schools, probably more higher education, and workplaces are really designing spaces these days for optimized performance. Obviously, if you're still going to an office, because we live in a virtual world these days, you may work from home. But if you have a career and you go to an office, you may have noticed if it's more modern, if they have tendencies to want to design things for optimal productivity, for employees to be more happy. They've got things that offices are doing now, businesses are doing now to make the experience more productive, more in tune with how human animals function in an environment that
is a little unnatural.
Yeah. I mean, it's not natural to go and sit in a cubicle or sit at a desk for 8 hours a day. And so, you just simple stuff like keyboards, those keyboards, remember those keyboards that came out that had they weren't
There was
flat.
like a split.
They were split and they were angled to the side where you would grab the keyboard at like an angle
Yeah.
to reduce the stress on your wrists. It's ergonomical design. You've got these expensive chairs now that offices will often incorporate into the employee's experience, which contour to their back and their butt and make it more comfortable to sit at a desk for long hours.
Yeah, a lot of people sit on exercise balls now too.
Yeah.
And I think there's been a lot of, it's become quite evident that we have a certain amount of energy, physical energy, that we can allocate to certain tasks. And if we design those things with, ergonomics, the natural way that the body understands how to conserve energy and allocate it to tasks that we want it to allocate to, then you're going to get a lot more productivity out of the people working. So this idea of ergonomics is really interesting, especially when you look at it through the lens of personality type. One of the things I've been baffled about for a long time now is the insistence or the focus on physical ergonomics, and yet there's no real focus on personality ergonomics. We have certain amounts of energy that are, flow through us in a very similar way to the bodies, through our minds. And when you look at models like cognitive functions in the Myers-Briggs system, we've talked a lot about cognitive functions in previous podcasts. We've written a lot about cognitive functions. And one of the things that's really intriguing, especially when you look at it as your cognitive function stack in your personality type, in your Myers-Briggs personality type, what's called the primary cognitive function, or what we call your driver process, is another, one of the other words that we use for it is your flow state. And your flow state is basically what gives you energy by doing activities that activate this mental process. And flow will rejuvenate you. We define flow as like, what are the activities that you lose track of time when you're doing them? That you could be doing it for 6 to 8 hours, and yet it feels like an hour has gone by at the most. And when you leave feeling, even if it was like physical activity, or if it was something that another person would have found very tiring, you leave refreshed. Even if you're a little tired, you still leave feeling really good about yourself. That's your flow state. And every single person, every single personality type has a flow state. They are activities that activate that driver process. So imagine you could harness a person's flow state energy into a job or into a career, and the person doesn't leave work feeling exhausted. They leave work feeling refreshed, right? Even if they're tired, physically tired, they leave feeling really good about themselves, like they did what they're here to do. So this idea of, imagine the productivity. Flow state activities generally are like a third of the cost for 3 times the return when it comes to energy. And the opposite holds true too. Whenever you're doing anything that is out of your flow state, especially if it's in what we call the 3-year-old position, or what Myers-Briggs will call in your cognitive function stack, they'll call it your inferior process. Anything that forces you into the inferior is just, it's a photo negative of that. It's like 3 times the amount of energy for a third of the return. So imagine designing, like job descriptions where you could match it to a person's flow state, or at least make sure that they are not being thrown out of their flow state and get all of that resource, all of that energy allocated to the task at hand.
Where I see this coming up for me too, as I look at our education system, I could see this being useful in education too, with kids, with young people who are going through a learning experience that is, from what I can tell, at least in the public school system here in the United States, seems very one size fits all. Even at the base of like, they don't have nice office chairs in most classrooms. They don't have nice ergonomical design even physically yet in the education system, let alone personality-wise, like what we were talking about here. And so that's coming up for me saying, man, throughout your life, can you imagine if things were designed to be customized to you? And then it begs the question, okay, why hasn't this happened? Why haven't we thought about, we're starting to see inklings of careers and businesses putting in physical ergonomics. Education, I don't believe, has caught up yet. And we're starting to see those things be optimized physically at the business level. I don't think we're even close to the education level. And why? Why is it taking us this long as a developed nation in the United States, here in the West? Why is it taking us this long to even get to the place of physical comfort, physical ergonomics? I think we've spent so much time in the past just getting functional. We just get to the place where we can actually operate a business. Like our goal of making sure employees are productive and happy right now. We want to be productive, but it's more of like beat them till they're productive, metaphorically speaking. It's not to coax them or make it exciting for them. It's just they are getting paid, and that's the reward for putting this effort in. And now we're finally at a place where business is functional to the level where we can start to optimize the experience of the people working in the business. And I can see that function has to be there initially. I was, as you were talking and I was thinking about education, I was making this connection in my mind, thinking about school buses, how those seats on school buses are so uncomfortable. They're like straight backed. There's like no comfort at all in a school bus. And I thought, well, that's probably an invention of function to get people from one place to another. Whereas cars have much more ergonomical design in how their seats are, designed. They're not just transporting like herds of cattle of kids to one place or another. A family's using it, and they're maybe spending long hours driving to Disney World in the summer or whatever, or to soccer games throughout the year. And so they need that ergonomical design to fit to their body. But that school bus has been functional for so long. It's gotten us from point A to point B. And now why haven't, I guess, so a couple questions come from me. Why have we in the business world started moving into physical comforts and ergonomic design? We haven't in like education, for example. And so where's the difference there? And then beyond that, how do we begin to think about these personality or, emotional, mental ergonomic design in the workplace and in education? So those questions are coming up for me as we talk.
Yeah, they're intriguing questions. I think you mentioned, you kind of answered your question as you were talking too. You were saying, well, what I got from what you just said was, well, maybe we weren't at that point yet in the stream of time. Like,
sure,
we're just trying to get things functional. And I think your illustration of the difference between a school bus and a family car is apt, because the family car, like, you have a lot of options when you want to go. You have a lot of choices when you want to go buy a car. So they all have to compete to get you to want their car. And so they customize it. They customize it to a point where you're like, man, I love how comfortable these seats are. And that might be the deal breaker, or that might be the thing that, makes you buy that car as opposed to a different car that you have an option for. Whereas you don't really have a lot of options for school buses. It's not like there's like 5 school buses pulling up to your house in the morning and going, pick me, to transport you to school. So we end up customizing things when people have choices to choose options to choose something else. And we want to incentivize them to come with us.
Whereas Greyhound buses have more of an ergonomical seat design. Mm-hmm. If you're riding a bus commercially, not a school bus, it actually is a comfortable ride for you.
Yeah, and even though, I know that since 2008, the people have not had a lot of options where they can be employed. There's definitely been, less options that people have had, for where they're going to get a job. Because just getting a job is good. However, the ergonomics came in a long time ago. Ergonomics in business came in around the time when people definitely had a lot of options. I think ergonomics have been around as early, it probably even predates the 80s. But it always feels like these concepts of ergonomics and customizing things to make people happier in their workplace comes up in 2 situations. One, when there's a lot of jobs available and it's like an employee's market. And the second is when, even if in the general marketplace it's not like that, talent is being seduced. Like at places like Google and these big tech companies, big tech firms, they're trying to attract talent. And so there are certain positions or certain, people who have different skills that people always attempt to seduce them to their side. So the more options we have, the more we have the ability to say no, and people want us, the more they're going to make it, desirable to come to them. And schools aren't there because there's not a lot of options for school yet, I think. What's interesting or intriguing about this idea, though, is that I feel like you said, it's just, that's where we're at in the stream of time now. We're at a point in history where we can start considering these things. I mean, think about how the average grunt laborer was viewed 100 years ago. I mean, it's not like they're going to make anything in like steel mills ergonomic for them. People were dying because they were exhausted because they were working 12 hours a day. So there was a general idea about laborers or anybody in the workforce where we didn't really honor them. And 100 years later, we are at a place in the stream of time where we now are honoring individuals. It doesn't matter whether or not they're the janitor all the way up to the CEO. We're now honoring them, and we're trying to make it so that their lives are a little easier because they don't have to choose us.
Well, and individuals are not putting up with it anymore. They're saying, I'm not going to go work 14 hours in a steel mill with safety regulations that are off the charts that are going to get myself killed. Like, I want to show up and actually have a quality of life in the experience I'm living right now.
Yeah, and a lot of the really dangerous jobs, I mean, obviously there's still dangerous jobs that exist, but a lot of them are being automated. So there's less of a need for people to do these really terrible jobs. I mean, we don't have like little kids as chimney sweeps anymore. There's just a very different work culture in developed countries than it was before. So now we're at a stream of time when we're starting to consider things like ergonomics, physical ergonomics, having people sit on, medicine balls, etc., or exercise balls. I can't remember. Are the medicine balls like the big ones or are they the little heavy ones? I can't remember.
I don't.
The weighted balls.
I think the medicine balls are those small ones that are heavier that you use for exercising, right. And the exercise balls are the ones that people use to sit on.
Yeah.
I mean, they use them for exercise as well, but they sit on them. It's
the one that
at work.
Yeah, it's the one you blow up and it's like in the corner of your living room all the time. You never use it and you just like sit on it when there's no other seating. I think those are exercise balls.
I've known a lot of people, though, in a corporate environment that use those as their seats. They would use them at their desk and it would help support their back. It would give them strength in their muscles and they would use it all day long.
Yeah, better posture, etc. So the idea then of, well, why hasn't this happened already for personality ergonomics is I just don't think we're ready yet. Or we might be ready now and this is the time and we just weren't there yet, I think. What's interesting about personality ergonomics, especially as somebody who basically saturates themselves in these concepts all day long like we do, to me, it's definitely not easy to implement these things. I mean, when they were first implementing physical ergonomic solutions, there was a cost involved, right? Like they would have to replace all their keyboards. They would have to replace all their chairs or desks or whatever. Like they'd have to rip things out and rebuild them. So there's definitely cost involved. And I think the same thing would apply for introducing this concept of personality ergonomics in the workplace and in schools. There would definitely be cost involved because you would have to start thinking in terms of systems. You couldn't just, have an empty chair and then just go look for the nearest person whose resume looks as close to what you're trying to find as possible and then dump that person in that chair. That's the easy way of going about it. And even that's not that easy. You still have to go through a hiring process, which anybody who's ever done any hiring knows that hiring can be very painful. And it's definitely a completely different way of looking at things. And yet at the same time, I personally believe that the payoff would be big enough. I think if we thought in these terms and really attempted to figure out, not use personality type exclusively to hire, but have an understanding of how personality types impacts people's flow states so that we could make little tweaks, right? Like we wouldn't have to do these major, I'm only going to ever hire an ESTJ for this, this management position. That's not really what we're insinuating here. We're more talking about, okay, so I have a management position. I've hired this ESTJ. Now that I know that this guy's an ESTJ, which may or may not have been a part of my consideration, now that I know that about him, what do I know about ESTJs? Well, I know that they lead with a process, or their driver process is a process called extroverted thinking, that you and I, we call it effectiveness. So if I know that about my employee, I know that they're an ESTJ, I know that their flow state is effectiveness. What are the kinds of things I can do to make sure that they are experiencing activities or parts of their job that activate that part of their brain often enough, if possible, as much as humanly possible, so that they're always feeling rewarded by their job. They're always gaining energy by being there. They're always feeling really good about it. And we kind of do this as people a little bit naturally. Like, we naturally gravitate towards careers and professions and job descriptions that we think are going to match our personality, right? We're like, well, it's not my personality to go do accounting, but it's totally my personality to go do, coding, right? So we kind of do this anyway, but we'll get to certain businesses that, my personality loves coding, but then I get into that business or that particular company, and I'm in a position where I'm supposed to be doing coding, and my direct manager or supervisor or lead or whatever it is doesn't understand how I work at all, and they have created a context that even though I'm coding and I'm enjoying coding, everything else about my job is making me miserable because the entire context is designed for somebody else and not for me. And I think we do this a lot unconsciously because we're always designing things for other people that we assume are just like us. We're designing things for ourselves. So if we're in a position of leadership in any way whatsoever, we might be unconsciously sabotaging other people's flow states simply because we're trying to design an environment that would be activating our flow. And so I think this idea of moving into personality ergonomics means that even though we don't have to change the job descriptions, we don't have to hire entirely based on type, we can at least make sure that once a person is in that position, their environment is conducive to their flow state. And what's great is that there's only 8 of them. There's a lot of different activities. There's endless activities. But if you can start matching them to a person's flow state and starting to understand the quirks of how their flow state works and designing things to match those and not pull them out of that flow state, I think it could be extremely powerful for a company. Yeah,
and I think it doesn't even have to be as structural as changing, how your office is set up necessarily, desk arrangement or anything like that. It could be as simple as understanding which of the personalities that are in the company, in your team, maybe your team is together, maybe you're a team lead, and you've got 5 to 7 people on your team, understanding which personalities are going to be able to, let's say, work remotely from a coffee shop or from home and still be able to be productive versus which types are going to want to check in with you and make sure they're being accountable to somebody for their own sake so they don't just goof off.
Oh, you
knowing the difference,
You've got a great story about this. Somebody in a company recently hired an ESFJ who leads with their driver process or their flow state is a process that's technically called extroverted feeling, or what we call harmony. And they were working remotely. And what was the story of that?
They were hired as a salesperson. I was helping consult with a company recently about building their sales team. And this ESFJ, who leads with harmony as their driver, was interviewed very, very well. The first 2 weeks or so, did a really great job through the training experience. I was very hands-on with this person. And about week 3, 4, and beyond, they started, because they were working remotely by themselves.
Because in the first 2 weeks, they were
with me in the office.
They were in the office, right?
Yeah, I was consulting. I was actually present with them, and other people were around. It was a very people-centric environment during the training experience. Everything was going great. I was like, man, this is the right hire. This is fantastic. And then they move off-site to work from their home remotely, and all of a sudden, the level of proficiency, the ability for them to operate at a high level, just started to deteriorate by the week. And I was baffled. I was like, this person was so great. I mean, I wasn't super baffled. I sat down and thought about it, and I determined, they're a harmony driver. They're an ESFJ. They love to be connective with people. I mean, that harmony process loves to connect with people. It loves to be associated with people. And here they're on the phone making sales calls in isolation at a desk at their home. They're not married, by themselves, no interaction with humans except over the phone when they connect with them. But a lot of, a sales position isn't as connective as being in an office with somebody. So it ended up that it just didn't work out. We basically parted ways amicably, the company that I was consulting with, and they went on, on their way. It didn't work for them because they needed really to be in an office environment, to be able to come in, get coffee, talk around the water cooler with someone every morning, talk about the show they watched last night, connect, do their calls, take a coffee break, have lunch together with people in the office, feel like they're part of a community, and that wasn't there for them. And I saw it just totally ruin them for being able to be a great salesperson in this role because of their personality. And it had nothing to do with their work ethic. This person works hard. It didn't have anything to do with their proficiency. He understood how to do things. He was actually really good during training. He was actually very good on the phone in the sales position I was training him for. It was just that piece of not being connected to people in an office that didn't work out for him. And he was living too far away to actually come in the office, so that we ended up just parting ways. It just didn't work out. And it was okay. It was amicable separation, but that's the reason that it wasn't a working arrangement with this guy.
Yeah. So I think that's a great example. And you said before, you don't have to necessarily, refab your office. And I don't think you have to either. However, small little tweaks sometimes can make a major difference. I think of people who are INJs in the Myers-Briggs system, INFJs and INTJs. And when you understand how their driver process works, their driver process is technically called introverted intuition, and we call it perspectives. And it requires, it practically requires sensory deprivation. In order to work really well and to get the best creative thinking done, they really have to make sure that they have like zero distractions. And I've noticed people who use that process, this actually also goes for the ENJs, ENTJs and ENFJs as well, but it's even more so for the INJs, that if they have their back to a door in their office, or if their desk is set up so that their back is to the entrance of maybe their cubicle or whatever, a part of their mental real estate is allocated towards wondering if somebody's going to sneak up behind them, right? Like if they're not going to be able to see them coming and prepare for the distraction. They're always afraid that somebody's going to be distracting them at any moment. And so that is a mental real estate hog, right? Like how efficient is it if a portion of your brain, you're like trying to get your best work done, you're trying to be creative, you're trying to, problem solve or whatever it is that is within your job description. And a part of your mental real estate is allocated to a completely unrelated concept, which is I might be getting distracted. So the tiny little tweak is turn the desk around, right? Have your back to a wall and be able to see the door or the entrance to the cubicle or however, wherever else it is. Another concept would be like being in a fishbowl, being in like the middle of a bunch of desks in an office and just feeling like you're going to get distractions from every possible corner. Just tweaks like, if you could request from your supervisor, your lead, your boss or whatever, your manager, can I just have a desk that's closer to the back of a wall? Like, can I be able to see the room as opposed to being in the middle of the room? That will allow you to reallocate that mental real estate back on the task at hand. It's okay if somebody comes and interrupts you as long as you can see it coming and prepare for it mentally, even if it's only like a 5-second preparation. Just little things like that. Understanding how the flow state works, understanding what is required for it to be able to focus on the job, and honor it enough to set up circumstances so that you can be there as much as possible. And like you were talking about with the person who's leading with harmony, they started to, completely go downhill when their driver process was not honored, when it was starving, really. And so just being able to create these circumstances where we acknowledge that person has needs with that driver process. And if we don't get those needs met, or if we kind of put them in a tough bind where they can't utilize that need as much as they would like to be able to get their best done, their best work done, well, then you're just not going to get the most productivity out of them. Absolutely.
And other little things like this, I'm probably, when I used to work, corporate type jobs, when I had day jobs, 9-to-5 day jobs, for the first 6 months of starting a job, my personality, I'm learning. So I'm using my driver, which is the technical definition is extroverted intuition. We've nicknamed it exploration. And I'm excited because I'm learning something new. I'm making connections. I'm, pattern recognizing. I'm learning something new over the first 3 to 6 months. And then, the 6-month mark comes around and I'm starting to get bored. There's not much new to learn. I've already mastered all the procedures, the processes, all the things I have to master. And I'm starting to go, oh, I'm bored. And I start becoming, I'm serious. I'm a terrible employee at this point. I need to own my own business because I just can't be employed. I'm unemployable. I start to become a terrible employee in that environment.
Now, what's your type?
ENFP.
Okay. So you're an ENFP, and so you lead with exploration. That's actually a known phenomenon, what you're just describing. I'm an ENCP, so I lead with exploration as well. And I'm the same way. At the 6-month mark, once I've learned everything there is to learn, like, that's it. I'm done. And where I started out as like a complete and total A player. And people were like, wow, if you keep going this direction, you're going to own the business. By that 6-month mark, I'd totally turn into a C player.
Well, and contrast that with someone, let's say someone is an ISFJ in the Myers-Briggs system, which leads with a technical process called introverted sensing. It's a learning style, and we've nicknamed it memory. It takes a long time for memory to feel like they've mastered something because they really want to reconcile it with things they've seen before. And so someone that comes in that is leading memory, this isn't across the board. If they've had experience, obviously they're going to show up to the table knowing what they're doing and being competent. But if it's a brand new experience, a brand new job they've never encountered before, the first 3 to 6 months, they might struggle with some of the procedures, mastering those, and it might be miserable for them. They might hate it. They might not enjoy the learning process. But once they've learned and mastered the material, they might possibly be the best employee you've ever had at your company. It's the way that we go. So just having awareness around some of these things, this quote unquote personality ergonomic idea, awareness of how people flow, about how people learn, about how they show up in a workplace or in an educational environment or wherever institution they're plugged into. This can certainly help with understanding and facilitation of getting the best work from people and showing up as your best self if you're showing up to a job or a career or a learning environment.
Yeah, the 2 types that lead with memory are ISFJs and ISTJs. And seriously, if you need somebody who's going to be loyal and doing the same task for like 20 years, ISJs are your best employees. And usually contexts honor that. They reward that a lot. And so if you're going to deal with an exploration person, which is a completely opposite type, an ENTP or an ENFP, at that 6-month mark, if you want them to continue being that A player and the person who could own the business someday, quote unquote, then you got to keep throwing new stuff at them. And if you're used to having ISJ employees, doing that to them will crumble them, right? They'll actually leave the job because you're throwing too much novelty at them. Whereas an ENP will crumble if you don't throw enough novelty at them. So understanding how these flow states work means being able to, to create an environment that honors the individual's flow states and not, throw something at the ISJ over and over and over again until they get like PTSD from it, or just keep the ENP doing the same rote tasks over and over until they stab themselves in the face over it. So it's really powerful. One other thing that I was thinking that could make a really a hostile work environment for an accuracy person. Now, accuracy is it's the function that is technically called introverted thinking. And this is the driver, the flow state process for the ITPs, so INTPs and ISTPs. And unlike the harmony person, the ESFJ, and actually ENFJs also lead with harmony. So the person that Joel was talking about before who, goes to work and does great when surrounded by other people, but then now that they're working remotely out by themselves at home is just kind of losing their oomph. Both ESFJs and ENFJs probably experience something pretty similar. On the other side are the ITPs, INTPs and ISTPs. And if they have too much socialization, and this can show up in like office politics or office drama, right? Where like it's always some big deal where everybody's got big issues and human resources is always involved or whatever it is, that creates a hostile work environment for an accuracy person because they're all about the data. They need to just focus on their job and just be all about the data. If there's too much interpersonal dynamics and politics going on around them, that will throw them out of their flow state and they won't be able to last very long. I also think about like your brother. Your brother is an ESFP, and so he leads with what's technically called, I can't say the word technically. Have you noticed this? For some reason, like my mouth will not form the word technically. Anyway, it's technically called extroverted sensing.
Sure.
We call them sensation. And that's very kinesthetic and in your body. And your brother cannot sit still. Like, he works for your family business. And I have noticed your family go to great lengths to make sure. I mean, even though he's got an office and he's got a chair and he's got a really nice computer setup, etc., I don't think I've ever seen him there. Ever. Not once. He is always up physically interacting with people, up moving about. And I don't think it would even be possible for him to just sit there.
Yeah, he's definitely wanting to be in his body. And the same thing happened with him in school. Like when he was learning, he couldn't. And you can totally see this illustrated for this type of person in a school. These are usually the kids that are acting up in the classroom because they're bored. They don't want to sit and learn through a book and study. They want to get out and touch things and feel things and be a part of the world and push buttons and like be very sensory in how they show up and learn. And so, if you're either one of these types of people, you lead with sensation, or you've got sensation as one of your flow states, you're going to want to have an environment of work that really stimulates your senses all the time. You're probably not going to be a cubicle desk type person.
Yeah.
You're probably in a career that doesn't even put you in an office environment.
Yeah, my dad's an ESTP, so he also shares sensation as a driver with your brother. And he was a marketing director for ages. And he was never at his desk either. He was always up moving around. Even when he was, I think the only time he was actually sitting was when he was like specifically in a meeting with somebody. But otherwise, he worked for this major like do-it-yourself hardware, huge business in Southern California during the 80s and 90s. He's retired now. But at the time that he was a marketing director, I think he would prefer to just like walk around the buildings and get ideas about where to go next. He couldn't just sit there at a desk. It was just not his way.
But he would thrive in deal-making situations.
Oh, totally.
Like cutting deals with magazines or radio programs to do advertising for his business. Like he thrived in these deal-making environments because it was adrenaline rush. It was all sensories in the moment. Mm-hmm. He was alive during that experience.
Yeah, and the company he worked for acknowledged this and basically said, if you get the return, if your marketing ROI is there, then we don't really care what you do and how you do it. And so he was in a situation where the company had created an ergonomic situation for his personality type. I think they would have been just as happy had he been sitting there at the desk all the time, but they didn't force him all the time, they didn't force him to do that.
Yeah.
And then keeping that's my dad, but keeping on the track of your family business, your dad, who's an ISFP, he leads with introverted feeling, or what we call authenticity, and it's the same deal. You can see that because he owns his business. You can see that he's constructed for himself an ergonomic environment. And what's interesting about that is that it can be hostile to other types, people who don't use his same function. But you can really see how he's created an environment for himself where his authenticity process, which is he wants to leave his mark on everything. He's got an artist's soul. So everything is very much about presentation. It's a really beautiful environment. He's done a lot to make sure that it's aesthetically pleasing. And everything has a personal touch on it. Like, it's not just this faceless, nobody feels like it's this faceless corporation where, that you're just a cog in a machine. Like, he makes sure that people feel very, like, they matter as individuals.
Yeah. So you can see how different personality types show up to business differently. And as we talk about personality ergonomics, this concept of physical ergonomics, making chairs and computer keyboards and mouse pads and other things comfortable physically and usable physically for optimal performance, we'd like to have you start thinking a little bit about personality ergonomics. And this can be in the workplace. This can be in the education environment where your kids go to school, or colleges, universities. This can also play out in your home. If you're married to somebody who's a different personality type than you have things set up in the kitchen that make so much sense to you, and you guys have fights about this. And, it's a physical ergonomic situation. Like, that doesn't make sense to put the dishes over on this side and the silver over this side. But there's also non-physical things that may not make sense to each of you. So just this concept, what do you think about this? Have you noticed personality ergonomics coming up for you in your work environment, in your career, in your personal life? And, this is, again, we always say this is a discussion starter. We'd like you to take this concept and give some feedback to us. How has this shown up for you? How do you feel that your business, your career, the school you attend, the school your kids attend, your home is set up for the personalities that are involved in that place? And how could it be done even better based on those personalities?
Yeah, good question.
So come over to our website, personalityhacker.com. Leave some feedback right below this podcast. And you can also find us at facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack.
If you enjoy our podcast, please subscribe to us and leave a review on iTunes. Ratings are nice and reviews are even nicer. So let us know what you think, and let us know if you have any podcast suggestions or questions or ideas. You can shoot them over to us at info@personalityhacker.com.
And I have a personal request for you this week as well. For me personally, would you be willing to share this podcast with someone in your life, someone or somebody in your life that you think would really resonate with some of the concepts and ideas we have here? A lot of times people discover our podcast, a most recent episode, it resonates with them so strongly. We get an email from them that says, I've been binge listening to your podcast all weekend or all week on my morning commute or my evening commute. And we'd really appreciate, I would personally appreciate if you would introduce us to a friend of yours or a family member of yours, somebody that you know that you think would really resonate with the things we talk about on here. And I think you'd be kind of cool in their eyes for introducing them to something that you resonate with. And if you both resonate with it, it'd be fun to listen to it and then talk about it later that week together and learn together. So hopefully we see you around the community. Hopefully you'll introduce us to one of your friends or family members, and we will talk to you on the next episode of Personality Hackers Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Can't wait to talk to you soon.